First things first, disclaimer. I'm employed and I'd like to stay employed. One of the side effects of being employed is that you end up doing a lot of research in your spare time. All of the research has been done in my spare time. This is all from publicly available sources. You could discover this just as easily as I did if you know what you're looking for. The voice is in your head. So I've been in information security for 15 plus years. That's going to have to change to a different kind of number pretty soon, and that scares me too. I've done everything from firewall admin and log review all the way up to CISO of a publicly traded financial. So I've seen it all, I've done it all, and I'm not afraid to tell other people to do the crap jobs I've been doing for the last 15 plus years. I've done a lot of stuff in the utilities vertical. You may have heard me talk about that crap. I've done a lot of stuff in the financials vertical, and I'm not an expert in anything. Remember, if somebody tells you they're an expert, they're lying. Nanoseconds. In researching, and thanks to the Twitter, I came across this awesome clip of a rather incredible scientist and mathematician who gave us compilers and programming languages, and much more exquisitely than I could possibly say, is going to tell you about nanoseconds. Admiral Hopper.
They started talking about circuits that acted in nanoseconds, billionths of a second. Oh, I didn't know what a billion was. I don't think most of those men downtown know what a billion is either. And if you don't know what a billion is, how on earth do you know what a billionth is? I fussed and fumed. Finally, one morning, in total desperation, I called over to the engineering building, and I said, please cut off a nanosecond and send it over to me. And I've brought you some today. Now, what I wanted when I asked for a nanosecond was, I wanted a piece of wire which would represent the maximum distance that electricity could travel in a billionth of a second. Now, of course, it wouldn't really be through wire. It'd be out in space, velocity of light. So if you start with the velocity of light and use your friendly computer, you'll discover that a nanosecond is 11.8 inches long. The maximum limiting distance that electricity can travel in a billionth of a second. Finally, at the end of about a week, I called back and said, I need something to compare this to. Could I please have a microsecond? I've only got one microsecond, so I can't give you each one. Here's a microsecond. 984 feet. I sometimes think we ought to hang one over every programmer's desk or around their neck so they know what they're throwing away when they throw away microseconds. Now, I hope you'll all get your nanoseconds. They're absolutely marvelous for explaining to wives and husbands and children and admirals and generals and people like that. An admiral wanted to know why it took so damn long to send a message via satellite. And I had to point out that between here and the satellite, there were a very large number of nanoseconds. You can explain these things. It's really very helpful, so be sure to get your nanoseconds.
For the record and for posterity, if you haven't spent a significant amount of time studying Admiral Hopper, you're failing. Do it. The woman was brilliant. She gave us compilers. She gave us programming languages. Her contributions to computer science are astronomical, and her explanations of the mundane are brilliant and hilarious. There's a clip of her going toe-to-toe with David Letterman that will knock you right off of your socks. It's absolutely amazing stuff. I had every intention of bringing some nanoseconds to give out, but it turns out the Transportation Security Administration has a lot of problems with bundles of wire in luggage. They have a lot of problems with pennies. You can imagine what they'd think of pennies plus wire in the same bag. So, possibly for the first time in the history of humanity, money equals c, the speed of light. You need to be very aware of how far light can travel, because it is, for now, the ultimate limiter. The distance that light travels in a millisecond, 1/1000th of a second, is about 300 kilometers. It's 186 miles for the rest of you. In a millionth of a second, you get about 300 meters, 328 yards, 984 feet. In a nanosecond, you get about 30 centimeters, or roughly a foot, 11.8 inches. These are the absolute finite distances. This is as far, as fast as you can possibly go. In reality, you go a whole heck of a lot slower than this because we're not talking about light moving in a vacuum. At the best, it's moving in air or optical fiber, or it's electrons moving through a conductor. So those distances get quite a bit longer. It's much more costly. Most people, like she said, don't have a good handle on what these kind of numbers are. And the majority of this talk, I mean, nanoseconds is funny to talk about. Most of this talk, we're actually going to talk about microseconds. We're not quite in the nanosecond space yet. When you think of things that are really, really fast in human scale, you think of the blink of an eye. Well, the blink of your eye, 350 to 450 microseconds. Trading is 10 times faster than that. So before you ask, this is a talk about money. Filthy, lovely money. And it's not about any of the other things on your buzzword bingo card. For the second year in a row, I'm talking about finance at DEF CON. Last year we talked about PCI, and we'll be talking about PCI again this afternoon in this room. It turns out that most of DEF CON is offense. It's how to be as offensive as you possibly can. And also a little bit of defense. But knowing sometimes that a vulnerability exists or a class of vulnerabilities exist, and I am going to talk about classes of vulnerabilities, that helps to sort of focus attention. And once attention is focused, then research starts happening, then development of solutions starts happening. And sometimes crazy people like me will tell you about stuff that doesn't matter this year. 2 years ago at DEF CON, my co-presenter Tiffany Radd and I told you all about how you weren't going to be able to keep your secrets outside of your brain. And this year the Department of Justice has said, give me your password or go to jail indeterminately. You'll stay there until we decide to let you out. So you had your 2-year warning. Last year I talked about bad things in the world of industrial control. This year I think I'm the only talk that isn't about industrial control. Next year, everybody's going to be talking about money. So most of us don't really have a good idea of this whole trading thing. I mean, you're used to, when you were younger and your dad was watching the news on TV, looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the Nikkei Index and NASDAQ and, alphabet soup. What the hell does that mean? And facing facts, we're hackers. We don't have any money. We don't have any legitimate money. The idea of stock markets and of exchanges started back in about the 1200s with commodity and debt trading. So this is, pork bellies and orange juice, just like Ferris Bueller. In the 1500s, we got intermarket trading, so where trades would be executed for one organization on multiple markets. In the 1600s, with the Dutch East India Company, we got our first real equity trading, where you didn't have to be a lord or a peer. You could own part of a company. So this was the beginnings of corporations. By the early 1800s, this is a funny story. Everybody knows RFC 1149, IP by avian carrier. Yeah, Reuters implemented that in the early 1800s. They used carrier pigeons to go between Aachen and Brussels. When you think about that for just a minute, you realize that patents and software are stupid because prior art is sometimes an awfully long time ago. In the late 1800s, the electronic ticker tape started happening. This is Daddy Warbucks kind of stuff. The glass dome and the paper spews out and somebody has a snit. This is telling you about what the prices were. By the mid-1900s, quotation systems started to come into active use. These are things that looked an awful lot like a typewriter. They had a little bit of electronic knowledge to them, but what they were capable of doing was telling you the next price. They were an inquiry type system. By the late 1900s, computers are maintaining all the records. They used to maintain records on paper and with chalkboards and stuff like that. If you're old enough, you remember using little bits of paper to move money around at banks. They called it deposit slips. If you're from a modern country, you've been using debit cards for the last 25 years. If you're in the United States, you'll start using them in another 5. Checks, really? And you spell them wrong too. It's QUES. And by the early 2000s, computers are trading with each other and largely without human intervention. Humans are providing sort of stick handling kind of guidance, but are not responsible anymore for individual trades. Some definitions that are really important. High-speed trading is committing trades on a scale faster than human interaction. So remember, the fastest humans can go is the blink of an eye. There really isn't that much else about us that can go any faster, and that's 350 to 450 microseconds. Trades are now in the very, very low 3 digits and very, very high 2 digits numbers of microseconds. Algorithmic trading is using math, and at this point, about half the room glazes over completely, and the other half of the room starts giggling because they know that the speaker doesn't know enough about math. Based on the results of incoming information, market data feeds, and even English language or human language press releases, computers are able to make trades, executing literally in that flash moment. I said change. Here we go. Arbitrage. This is a funny term. Everybody likes saying it because it's got that lovely arbitrage. Sounds very important, very Wall Street. It's the practice of taking advantage of the difference in price between two or more markets. This is historically done in space, where you'll have a single organization that trades on NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. And it has slightly different prices on the two. So you would buy wholesale and sell retail. You'd buy at the low price and sell at the high price in the other market. Everybody sort of naturally does this. We're accustomed to buying wholesale and selling retail, except if you're in farming, in which case you buy retail and sell wholesale. Now we're talking about doing arbitrage in time. So this is no longer about having to be in multiple places at once. This is about being inserted interstitially between two other events in time. So from the time that you know that someone wants to purchase a large number of shares until the time that the purchase executes, there's a gap in there. And that gap in there, you can step in and say, well, I've got them for sale. So it never goes out to the wider community because you're right there ready to sell. So arbitrage is very interesting, mostly because when you said, I've got them ready to sell, you don't have them yet. You're going to buy them right away so that you've got them by the time they get around to saying, oh yeah, I'll buy from you, inside of hundreds of microseconds. Scary fast. When markets were new, middle of last millennium, trade times were hours. You know, it's human beings. They're arguing with each other about price and haggling. Everybody loves a good haggle, right? By the late 1800s, we're down to minutes. By the 1900s, we're down to seconds. This is largely the trading technology that we're most familiar with because we've all watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off one too many times. Anybody do this thing? Yeah. By the 2000s, we're into hundreds of microseconds. In the future, I don't know, tachyon pulse emissions or something, future prediction kind of stuff, because we're going to hit that wall of the speed of light, and we're going to hit it kind of hard. It's going to hurt a lot. The architecture of these systems is astonishingly simple. When you look around the internet for architecture diagrams for high-speed trading, what you'll see is that someone threw up in Visio and gave you a chart this big, and it looks like shit. Because they've included every damn thing they can think of. We all have the blinky lights and shiny things disease. These people have it in a way that we'd look at them and giggle because they are completely insane about this stuff. In reality, there's only 4 moving pieces you need to know about. You've got an exchange of some type, whether it's the New York Stock Exchange, whether it's a commodity market in Chicago, whether it's a private exchange, whether it's a, well, anything, Toronto Stock Exchange. You have a trading engine that's tightly coupled to that. And the trading engine is this odd special piece of hardware, and I'll come back and talk to it in a minute. The trading engine gets its information from market data sources. So this is telling you what's going on in other markets, what's going on in the news, what's going on in the markets you're tightly coupled to. And there is a human who provides, like I said, this sort of stick handling control over what's going on. That machine